Call this open standing committee on finance meeting to order. Today being March 3rd. For information purposes, there's a live audio video feed that's being broadcast and being recorded by Zoom and is available on the Town of Golden YouTube page. We have Councillor Hambrick attending virtually. We have the rest of council around the table. We haven't heard from Councillor Dale, and we have senior staff around the table. So with that, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the shared ancestral territory of the Tanan, the Secwepemc people. Golden is also home to the Métis Nation, Columbia River Society, and other diverse Indigenous heritage. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work in this territory. I'm looking at the item. Ms. Seville, are there any late items?
There are no additional late items other than what you have already received.
Oh, yes, there was an updated agenda. Okay, with that, I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Councillor Rutley, Councillor Manuel, seconding that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And we'll go to the adoption of the minutes of the Open Standing Committee of Finance that was held on February 17th. It seems so long ago. Look for a move of those minutes. Councillor Routley, second by Councillor Manuel. Council, any errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing here none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And council, is there any business arising from those minutes that we're not dealing with today? Seeing here none, we'll move on to, there's no delegations, no correspondence, and we're on to reports. Chief Financial Officer. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ozust. We have got some reports for you today. The final reports related to the operating budget for the town of Golden for 2026 through 2030. And we are going to be starting with general government services. So up above, you can see the total cost of general government, which includes mayor and council in this case, as well as corporate services, IT, and financial services. So starting with the mayor and council budget, you will see an average increase to salaries and wages, a slight increase to contracted and general services, as a result of likely changes with a new council, as well as attendance at conferences within the new year. No changes to material supplies and utilities. And separately delineated within the mayor and council budget are all the sponsorships, the GADSAR grant, as well as the bursaries and awards that are given out by council.
I can't find it. Where is it? It's in the email.
Just for the record, that was direction So, Councilor Cooper, you need a second?
Yeah, sorry. I just can't find it.
Then I can't shut off my phone.
Yeah. No.
Thank you. All right, so those are the general operating expenses for mayor and council. As noted, in 2027, there is a slight increase to contracted and general services as a result of the election that would be held in 2026 and the likely attendance at a few more conferences within that time period. And then below that, we have operating projects. So in 2025, council approved the Create to Get Closer project. And then for 2026 and beyond, the projects that are listed there include Indigenous relationship building, some performance evaluation development, a continuation, as well as some new council chairs, and then some supplies for new council, including iPads, some training sessions, as well as photos. In order to fund those projects, we do have some funding from general surplus, as well as a transfer from the financial stabilization reserve for those council-related items. So that in a nutshell is the mayor and council budget, and I welcome any questions you have before I go on to general government services.
And that, I'm sure there's gonna be some questions on this. Sure, there's gonna be some questions on this one. Counselor Will?
I just have a question with regards to the election. Recently, we approved for somebody to be covered by our ABC. Is this something that's new, like to hire somebody to come in and to work on the elections? Because this was something that was just kind of, I wasn't aware of what happened last time. I just.
Ms. Seville?
I can speak to that. So this year, as part of that staff report that came forward about the MIABC, we did make a note in there as to why we were looking at bringing on a contractor for this year. And that's so that we can add capacity to our team to not only support some of the large scale projects that are happening this year, such as the OCP, but also to support some pre-election potential candidate information sessions and that sort of thing, so that we can kind of broaden the focus of what that looks like as a whole in terms of the election communications and the election in general.
Any follow-up, Counselor Will? Anything else, Council? So I have a couple. I guess first I'll start with the grant and aid for GATSAR. Is that a cash grant that we provide to Golden District Search and Rescue?
It is. It's a contract, an agreement with GATSAR based on receiving financial information from them, and then 7,000 per year goes towards their operations.
Thank you for that. And that leads me into my next thought process is we've been talking about the contributions that council makes in kind to other service groups within the community. And is this the place where that would be, once that's established, itemized or tracked, or would it be tracked somewhere else?
That is an excellent question. At this point in time, the reporting on third-party contributions from the town and council to the rest of the community is an item on the work plan for the financial services department. As a part of the strategic planning that council has set out, they've itemized that as one of the key requirements. And so we will be doing that. And at that time, we may offer suggestions or recommendations as to where those costs should be housed, but I don't want to speak in advance to that, not knowing what those recommendations will be before analyzing.
Thank you. So it's to come.
Yes.
And in the calendar year?
I believe that is in the work plan for the end of this year or next year. I would have to double check.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, there was, and you're gonna have to forgive me, there was a $3,250 item that we talked about at one of the previous sessions. And the thought was that that would fit into council's budget. And for the life of me, I cannot remember what that was. So if nobody remembers off the bat, I raised the flag that this may pop up at some point in time. And if it does, we have the ability to slide it in. And I can't remember what it was, just the amount of me stuck with me. I'm looking around the rooms, there's blank faces, nobody remembers. So I'll leave that one alone. The other item that I brought up was the concept of a 25th anniversary celebration for the pedestrian bridge. And that's not a direction or a decision of council at this point in time, but if that were the desire of council to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the building of the pedestrian bridge, would that fit in this mayor and council budget, or was that fit somewhere else? Sounds like it's discretionary by the looks on the face. Mr. Denegar?
Yeah, it hasn't been discussed as a particular item because we still need to find out what community groups may have interest in it and their own funds to contribute to it. So if we can piggyback it on some other event at that time, there may be minimal cost to it, in which we could come back with a budget amendment in the future.
So then what I'm hearing is there's an opportunity if there's going to be a contribution from the municipality for this 25th, if there is a 25th anniversary, that we could actually amend the budget and find some dollars to be able to do that.
I know my CFO loves it when we say find money, but yeah,
So
there
to-
may be that.
So to
opportunity.
that end, I'd even bring it up to the point of let's have a discussion whether there's a desire from council to be involved in this or not, and then we can get it either on the radar or off the radar. And with that, I'll go to Councilor Manuel, whose arm is getting sore, I'm sure.
Um, there are some organizations, I know when I used to work at the visitor center, it was a very popular attraction for tourists. So that may be, there may be something help there or involvement there. The museum has quite a bit of information on it. So there's another possibility there, but if it's good for local business through tourism, the Chamber of Commerce might be interested.
So, well, thank you for doing some of the work of staff. Before, and I guess staff are, am I correct in assuming that staff are already having some of these conversations, Mr. Deniger?
Some preliminary discussions have been had so far. The interest is to help but not lead. So
Okay, to that end, I will raise the question to council. Is there any interest of council to play a substantive role, and that's to be defined by staff, in commemorating the 25th anniversary of the construction of the pedestrian bridge?
Personally, yes.
Councilor Cooper?
Yeah, I think that there should be, it would be nice for the community if there was something. I don't know, depending on capacity, if we should be the leaders as well. I think it's great to have a partnership with other entities, especially with the Spirit Square, maybe a revitalization, a little event down there would be fabulous. But as far as budgetary, like how much are we gonna spend? And I think that all needs to be developed in a work plan with, after we find out who else is interested in attending the roundtable.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilor Wheel?
I think this is definitely something that we should be taking on. We started the film group. You know, we can start something as a council to get this rolling. And I think it ends up around September. Like, I'm trying to remember when it actually opened.
September?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the role can, excuse me, range from like a $5,000 to a $25,000 or a $30,000 or $40,000 commitment. So it's kind of a determination at this point in time whether what level of financial commitment we would be willing to come to the table with, whether we lead it or not, that would still be determined. But in my mind, it'd be good to have a budget allocation, and we could amend the budget and retract that amount. And if in fact we play a smaller role, then Councilor Wheel?
Do you wonder about like if there's like a heritage grant or something that can go towards something like this as well?
And that's,
This definitely would want to, and RMI, or Tourism Gold, and there's got to be dollars around that we could all contribute.
so I guess I gotta take one step back, and would it be the intent of council to be involved in, let's go to the point of, say, co-sponsoring a 25th anniversary of the construction of the pedestrian bridge? Councilor Hambrook?
Yeah, thanks, your worship. I mean, I would support putting $5,000 in the budget towards the celebration of the construction of the bridge. I would make that as a motion.
Councilor Hambrook, can I get some clarification of the number, please?
$5,000.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion for $5,000 to go in the as a budget as a line item for the 25th anniversary of the pedestrian bridge. Moved by Councilor Hambrook, second by Councilor Manuel. Any further discussion? Councilor Routley?
Thank you, Mayor. My only concern is really the capacity piece. So to be able to find some very capable community partners would be fantastic. I'm cognizant again, September is going to be a very busy month with the election happening the month after. And so I'd be worried about stretching staff capacity after having just heard that there's really a hope to make the most out of education or other resources for folks, and September is quite a critical month for the prep there. So certainly if I suppose I would pose a question to staff around the capacity for it, and recognizing that this isn't necessarily a strategic priority on the list. And so with 7 months out, what's the temperature look like for capacity there?
And actually, I'll preempt that, and I would make an amendment to the motion, make it $25,000 and hire a third party to do the coordination of the event. Process-wise,
Just to add some context, so during an election period, we actually internally we stop hosting any public engagement events. We do not plan any public announcements, and we do not plan any public events in general during an election period, because we don't want to be viewed as supporting any one particular candidate or providing an opportunity for platforming. So just taking that into consideration, if the town of Golden was to lead, we would be looking at not hosting any events during that election period.
can you define the election period for me, please?
I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but it's typically like end of August until election day.
So it's,
Once the nomination period has closed.
thank you, Councillor Hambrick, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, just my intention with the $5,000 is that it would be seed money for an organization that would be taking on the project, not town staff, not from within our own organization, but to have some money available for application by a community group to run to do the celebration.
Thank you for that. And with that, I would withdraw my amendment. So we have a motion on the floor, duly seconded, $5,000 in the mayor and council budget for the 25th celebration of the 25th. And I bring this up because in many instances, when we're in different meetings, we talk about all the good things we do. We talk about the need for celebration. Here's a unique opportunity, and now we're gonna shy away from it. And I think that's wrong. We need to be able to celebrate that pedestrian bridge. And I'll speak on behalf of that product. It has been an amazing feature for attraction for our community. I think there's value in celebrating that and the community spirit and work that went into it. So I think something needs to happen. With that, I'll get off the soapbox. And Councilor Cooper.
Can I just ask if staff would have like time capacity to just put it out there because we don't know the temperature of other organizations yet, would have the capacity to put it out there and follow up within a short time period just to see if there is anyone else interested? So
Yes,
that, okay.
Mr. Deniger?
And then we could come back to it. after.
Yeah, anytime seed money is made available, people step up. So I'm sure that would make a big difference to them. Like I said, few conversations, very preliminary. Some other organizations already have the work plans figured out for the year, so they're just concerned about their workload. But if there's capacity, I'm sure amongst a few of them, they'll find somebody. And if there's seed money like this 5,000 proposed, I'm sure that would make the difference between having it happen or not. And from our own corporate staff perspective, we absolutely do not have the capacity to take on any leadership of this, but we could certainly support, again, with the caveat that we need to be careful about how we handle it because it is election season coming up.
Thank you for that. Councilor Manuel?
I would agree with where we're going on this. $5,000 to support other groups and maybe get this thing going. The event with the pedestrian bridge was unique. It was the entire community got involved, including people from all over the world, actually. So it was a special event, and I think we can do it, or should I say, there can be a very good celebration out of this. We've got a lot of resources for it. So yeah, I'd be very, very much in favor of this.
Any other speakers to the motion? Seeing no other speakers, we'll call the question. All those in favor Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I think that was my list from this. Actually, I had one question of clarification with the create to get closer operating project. I see that same amount came from general surplus. Can you remind me the direction of council on that one, please?
I believe council requested that it did come from general surplus or general operating.
Okay,
I would have to look back to the resolution to know specifically, but 99% certainty there.
okay, thank you very much. Anything else with regards to mayor and council? Oh, Council Cooper, sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. I just had a question. The bursaries and awards, that is what we're giving to the high school, is that correct? And if we have, so we had a budget of 25, but we only used 15, so we only handed out 2 or 3 bursaries, is that what I'm assuming? And then where does that historically, have we used the whole bursary budget in the past?
So I can speak to that. So it depends on when the students are accessing the bursary. So we give out the full amount of bursary every year, but then some people take time off or they start their studies and go a different direction, or there's all sorts of reasons why we may not hit the full budget every year.
Thank you for that. Councilor Guil.
Just have one question with GadStar. Like, they do have a building over by the airport. Like, do we have any ownership on that building or no?
Looking to staff, Mr. Cochran, are you able to respond to that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, your worship, honestly, we'd have to look into it. I'd have to look into it. I'm not sure.
Like
I
it is,
don't know.
it is town of Golden Land, right?
Yes, it is. It's town of Golden Land.
So there would be some sort of like they don't have a lease, or do they?
A lease of the land from the town of Golden.
And is it like a dollar lease like the food bank? Okay.
So it sounds like there's a desire to get some more background on that situation with GadStar.
Yeah,
Because if I recall correctly, that property was privately owned by an individual in town, and either GadStar purchased it from that individual or was donated. I'm not sure how the transaction happened, or if the transaction happened. So some background detail on that, because there may be more in kind there than
yeah.
the
exactly.
7,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and I had one other note, and was with regards to on the general government interest and penalties. Just picked up the anomaly between in 25 actuals and 25 budget. Are you able to speak to that? Under operating expenses, general government services. Interest and penalties.
Through your
Under
worship, I think we've just gone through mayor and council, and I'll go through that next
It's-
under general government,
my
but
apologies. I thought I
see what
missed one of my notes.
you did not.
Okay, with that, finished up and the motions passed for mayor and council, and then we move on to general government. My apologies.
So moving on to general government services. Administration revenues for 2026 have definitely increased by 19%. A lot of that is due to an increased focus on recovering as much as we can for some of the contracts that we do have. So there is an additional almost $32,000 there as a result of the arena contract that will be contributed to the general administration of that contract. And the work that goes into it. There are contributions to administrative fees from the airport, the Emergency Operations Center, and from the cemetery, as well as water and sewer services. So that would be the administration fee revenue increase. Then next we have the rental and lease revenue. And this is mainly due to a lease, and I think 100%, this is an environmental lease that is managed by the Corporate Services Department, with rates seeing an increase starting in 2029. interest and penalties. I'll get out in advance of the question and note that as of yet, the 2025 year end is not finalized, and that is the last step in recognizing the revenue, which should be at least as much, if not more, than budgeted for 2025, and keeping that relatively stable and conservative in the out years is where we're going with that. We also have some revenue from grants, including the Columbia Basin Trust Ready Grant System, and then the UBCM Asset Management Grant, which is being used in part to fund the long-term financial plan for asset management. In 2025, there was an EV car share reimbursement. So you'll see that in the 2025 actuals, as well as some parking in lieu that has yet to be accounted for. So year-end adjusting journal entries there. In terms of operating expenses, the salaries, wages, and benefits will see a 10% increase in 2026, partially due to QP rate increases, partially due to succession planning within the corporate services department. We do have a long-term employee who will be retiring this year, and there is some overlap planned for in that year, and therefore an increase in the rates, as well as all regular salary increases as approved by council. Contracted and general services are seeing a 14% increase. However, it should be noted that there are some matching funds coming out of the financial stabilization reserve as a result of not having a deputy CFO in 2025 for the full year. Some of those funds have been posted to the reserve in 2025 and then will be used in 2026 through 2030 to offset some of the recapture from that time that was lost. So that is the general increase, and why you would see in 27 that goes down. You can also see in 2025 that salaries, wages, contracted, and general services are slightly lower, and that would be as a result of a few missing positions. No major change to material, supplies, and utilities. Some projects going on, just operating projects to the facility for town hall in both 26 and then 28, 29 and 30. So a slight dip in the expenditures in 27 and then increasing 28 through 2030. That's general maintenance required as a result of some condition assessment reviews and plans by the Public Works Department. You can see the same for the Golden Food Bank facility, some expenditures in both 27 and 29. Transfers to the financial stabilization reserve. Here's where you can see the additional $100,000 over what was initially planned for that is going into the financial stabilization reserve, and then back to normal in 26 with some additional increasing contributions in 27 through 2030. And then we have a nice long list of operating projects. So I can itemize those, but I might leave that for questions instead. Some of these are ongoing. Some of them are as a result of council direction, and others are required, such as the insurance appraisal. That's one that is required in order to renew our insurance this year. And funding for all of those projects is down below in the transfers to and from the reserves and surplus. That is the general government services in a nutshell. So I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you. Council, any questions, Ms. Brown, with regards to general government services? Council Guil?
Like you said, there's a lot of project. Do we have the capacity to match those projects?
Mr. Denigar?
That's what keeps me up at night. Yes, that is our work planning is done to actually make sure that we can accomplish these. We always aim to accomplish 100% and we budget appropriately.
Thank you. Anything else? Councilor Cooper?
I had, sorry, two. When we're doing the Ready Grant, when we're having the money in and out, because we are managing the funds going in and out, do we take an administrative fee from the grant for our time and working on that?
Ms. Brown?
There is an administrative portion of the grant, a cap on that. Part of that goes to the support from a consultant in order to run the program, and portion of that also goes to the town of Golden. Don't know the exact split right now, perhaps.
that's good.
We'd have to delve into the contract.
I probably ask that every year too. I should probably try to remember for next time. And the Golden Food Bank lines, when I see it's $1,000 for 1,400, and then it goes to 12,000, and then it's back down to 1,000, and it goes up to 13,000 in the 2026, 27, 29 years. Can you identify what those peaks are for?
The peaks are simply for projects planned by Public Works in order to maintain the building envelope. So while they are not capital in nature, they are necessary in order to maintain the quality of the asset.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councilor Wheel?
With regards to the food bank, the 12,000 and the 13,000, does any of those have to do with the electrical panel?
Mr. Cochran?
Through worship, no, not this time. These are to do with hot water tank replacement and re-roofing of the facility. This is what I've got on my list.
Any follow-up, Councilor Wheel?
When was the last time it was re-roofed?
Ooh, that's a toughie.
Through your worship, I don't recall it being re-roofed as long as I've been here, which is 16 years, 17 years.
I
Are you
thought
thinking
it
it was,
when I was in there, but
according to the condition assessment, it's coming due. So I mean, like all of our roofs, what we do is, what I try and do is prior to the year of planned replacement, just confirm that it needs to actually be done. And we'll do that.
Thank you. That's one of those two bumps in that funding. The second one is a hot water tank.
Yeah, hot water tank, your worship, and some other plumbing improvements.
I was
in
gonna
the
say that's a
facility.
pretty expensive hot water tank.
Yep.
So there must be more into that. Ms. Brown, can you speak to the bump in rental lease? I'm just trying to find that note again here. 2028 to 2029, it pretty much doubles. Is the, or Ms. Seville, is the intent to actually double the lease rates on those properties that we have, or in fact, are we adding more revenue stream to that? Ms. Seville?
So this is one lease, this is one lease in particular for a contaminated site. And what happened is back in 2019, my predecessor realized that we were actually undercharging in relation to the BC government approach to contaminated sites. So we've been trying to get them up to the full amount, which is 8% of the BC assessment value of the property. And so right now in the current agreement, they are at 50% of that 8%, under the condition that at the end of that contract, they will go to the full 8% of the BC assessed value.
And there's no opportunity to recover what we've lost in the previous years?
I don't believe so. That's before my time.
Thank you. Anything else, council? If not, that is the end of general government services. Do you need a motion for this box of tool?
Yes.
Is there happens to be some verbiage that the standing committee of finance recommend council approve the operating budget for blah blah. General government services as amended for inclusion into the draft 2026-2030 5-year financial plan. Look for move for that. Councilor Griot, seconder, Councilor Routley. Any discussion on the motion? Councilor Routley?
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I just had one final question with respect to the rental and lease revenue for the contaminated site, whether currently it's just kind of directed into the general surplus, and then like, supporting the general government services. And my mind goes to the conversations around the hope and intent to see something happen on the Old Town Works Yard, which is itself also a contaminated site, and it feels rather poetic to have perhaps the revenues of one contaminated site's lease go towards the remediation or otherwise the assessment of another, so that we might unlock some more housing. So I would just pose the question of where it's currently allocated, if it's just eaten up by the operating expenses of the general government services, and if there's an opportunity for future direction to change the direct allocation of those funds.
Or immediate direction,
Yes.
as the case may be. Ms. Brown?
Thank you for the excellent question. At this point in time, it is using to fund general government services. However, we have increased contributions to the reserves over the course of the next 5 years. But this one in particular is not earmarked specifically, as we don't have a contaminated sites reserve in it. So it is one for consideration. However, it is not in existence at this point in time.
So to flog this one a little bit further, if there was a desire of council, and I believe it's in the strategic plan, to deal with the contamination at the Old Town Works Yard, how, if we were to try and get, if there was within the capacity of staff to get that done in the next year, how would that be funded? Mr. Denigar and Ms. Brown are looking across the table at each other for you, Chris. Mr. Denigar, you're
Yeah, I
Great
think
call.
I think it's too early for us to actually give an answer to that, because we really don't know what the magnitude of those costs are and what the timeline is like. In all likelihood, it would be a question for later this year or early next year to actually determine total costs and funding. Setting it aside in a reserve, I like the idea of that, the philosophy of knowing this is a cost coming in the future, to set it aside. Whether we need to actually put it in a bank account for that specific purpose, I don't know if that's necessary right now to actually like designate a reserve for it. Especially not until we have the answer from this future staff report about what the magnitude is and any other properties that we may need to consider.
Thank you for that. So, Councilor Riley, is there any desire to put forward a motion of any sort?
Recognizing that there's already one on the table, and I'm quite pleased with the sort of clarification from the CAO on there's, without necessarily knowing the full scope of the cost, nor the without having the specific reserve in place and the allocation, nothing is preventing council in future years, once we know that the scope of the full cost, to just saying, okay, well, let's just throw that in and then let's go. And so hopefully the intent to see Old Town Works Yard is a persistent one throughout the years, and we can get that rolling. I'm happy with the current setup. Just wanted to clarify if there was in fact a specific allocation.
Thank you for raising that, Councilor Manuel.
I guess I'm asking something general, and I don't know if we can get, if there's a good answer, but I remember being on council when we were finding out that the money we're putting aside for replacement wasn't adequate and things are getting more expensive. And now what I'm looking at in the news is that the provincial government is putting a lot of very worthy projects on hold. And I'm just wondering if that's going to, if anyone has any concept whether that will affect our ability to get grants, or that we should be aware of.
Anybody want to bite on that elephant? Mr. Denigar?
Yeah, I'm sure. I think it's pretty obvious that the tone of the provincial government and federal government is that they're definitely being more careful with the cash on hand. So I would expect that grants are going to be more targeted. We've seen that already with the rumors around Fire Smart and so forth, and everything's always oversubscribed, but now it's even worse as they tighten their bags of cash that they've just so generously given us in years past. I don't think we can expect that for a while. And ongoing the trend of them pushing harder and harder on local governments to take full responsibility for our own infrastructure and for our own operations. I think that now, as you're going to see in the upcoming presentations from the CFO, we're taking that approach of we can't keep kicking these cans down the road. We can't keep expecting other orders of government to provide us funding for what is our responsibility. So yeah, we can't just keep hoping and dreaming that the province or the feds are going to help with that. If I may circle back to change back to the previous subject of the contaminated sites, the Old Town Workyard, it just popped into my head after your discussion there, that if that property and the advice from staff and council goes with it, that it will eventually be sold for profit, then we would potentially, ideally, recoup any costs we have to spend on assessments and so forth. So if it goes down the path of a nonprofit or not-for-profit, say affordable housing, we might not recoup that, but that's a choice for council in the future to make. But if it is sold as a profitable thing, where we get that money from is just temporary because we recoup that money.
Thank you for that. Any follow-up, Councillor Manuel?
Yes, I'm thinking that with this climate you describe, and which I think is fairly visible, that may, how to say, make a premium for us in being careful with our priorities and where we can be creative, because we can't, there are avenues that aren't with us as much, and we need to figure out how to still provide as many services as we can with maybe less support from the senior governments.
Thank you for that. We have a motion on the floor, duly seconded by Councillor Rowley, moved by Councillor Guil, if I remember correctly. Was it the other way around? Yeah. Thought that's what I said. Anyways, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And we move on to which subject matter next, Ms. Brown?
Next, we're going to be talking about the draft municipal property tax financial plan.
Okay, Ms. Brown.
So there is a little bit of a change in presentation this year of the municipal property taxes. And this has been done so that council can see where those funds are going, whether they're funding ongoing operations or being directly attributed to reserves. So council has on their strategic priorities list a request to bring the proposed police reserve forward in the current year. And therefore I have itemized it as a 1% of the prior year tax in 2026. My apologies, those dates are wrong at the top in the green.
Yeah.
So that is the 2026 year, starting with 81,742. So in 2026, there is a 50% increase to the reserves, so funding of municipal reserves, and we're actually maintaining steady with our municipal operations and slightly decreasing the budget. So only 5.98 million for municipal operations, and that's because of a multitude of factors, such as regular changes in operations, slight changes, increases in revenues, and so you can see it's relatively steady throughout the course of the next 5 years, from 2026 to 2030. But a large increase to the municipal reserves as a result of the initial long-term financial plan for asset management and the contribution levels required to fund our existing assets and the known deficit, as well as the ability to specifically earmark it so that the general public as well can be aware that it's not operations that are actually increasing the costs. It is the outdated assets and the need to rejuvenate them. And this will be more clear when we go into the next slide, which is the transfers to the reserves. And you can see how much is going in, but also how much is going out on an annual basis. So relatively not Not much to say about grants and interest. So grant in lieu and utility taxes. No major changes there, no anticipated changes. Property tax interest and penalties. We're really conservative in these amounts. There was a little bit of a surprise last year because the prior 5 years, the provincial small communities grant increased, and last year it did decrease by a significant amount. So that's being held steady as well, in anticipation of perhaps a decrease once again, based on the current economy. So the final line down below is the interest paid on prepaid property taxes. And so this is a proposal for council. It's not a necessity. However, it should be noted that right now we have 2 bylaws that allow the general public to prepay their taxes. And for those that are able to prepay, they receive interest. However, the interest is being paid by the town as a whole for people who are fortunate enough to be able to pay in advance for those taxes. And therefore, at this point in time, considering that it's costing anywhere from $16,000 to $25,000 per year, we would like to rescind those bylaws, as it is no longer a necessity to have a bylaw on file. Many municipalities currently have bylaws for prepaid taxes. However, this is as a result of the Municipal Act and the requirement within the Municipal Act. Once we did change over to the community charter, there's no longer a requirement. And so we can simply offer the opportunity to prepay your taxes, however, not provide interest on top. So that is for council consideration and included as a potential within this budget as an opportunity for savings of funds.
Thank you. Council, any comments, questions? I guess the first question I'd have, what would be the process if it was the desire of council to ensure that there was no interest paid on prepaid taxes?
At this point in time, with the bylaw currently in place, we would be paying up until this point. However, we could certainly bring that forward to a future council meeting in order to rescind that bylaw.
Thank you for that. So, Councilor Guil?
So it wouldn't be affecting this year's taxes then?
It may affect the first quarter, so we would likely have to pay in the first quarter. And if it is rescinded in time for the second quarter, then we would potentially not be paying taxes.
I have a problem with rescinding it when people think that they're getting interest on it. I could see doing it for the next tax season, but I think it's not fair if people believe that they're getting interest.
Thank you for the comments. I didn't see whose hand went up. Councilor Cooper? Such a gentleman.
With the amount being like $16,000, do you have an approximate how many pre-taxes are paid? Like if taxes based, it could potentially be 4 or 5 people. It doesn't necessarily like how many homeowners do you believe are prepaying approximately or impacted? Yeah.
The impact.
I'm not sure of the specific number, but I believe it is well over 50.
Councilor Utley?
Thank you, Mayor. It would be my
Conflict of
expectation
interest.
that anyone having prepaid their taxes for 2026 under the current system is grandfathered in, or ultimately whenever any rescinding of the current interest element for prepaid taxes comes into force, anyone that got in before that mark, I guess, would be fine. I guess as long as it's clearly communicated to folks. Obviously a lot of restaurants and businesses with the variance in their cash flows elect to pay when they're in the black and weather the storm while they're in the shoulder season. So certainly to make sure that administratively everything is fair and just, that's great. So I just want to make sure Yeah, to clarify that, yeah, anyone that prepays up to the point that any rescinding of that interest element, that, you know, they're still captured in the language.
Thank you for that. Ms. Brown?
So the bylaw that's currently in place and the prepayments that are being made now would be for the July 1st billing. And so perhaps with that in mind and not wanting to adversely affect the general public, as there is a renewal date in August, it could be that the current bylaw is extended or remains in place until June. And as of July 1st, we could look into the timing of that and rescind it for next year's tax prepayments. So as there is time for the general public to prepare and proper messaging going out with the new renewal forms.
Thank you for that. Councilor Guil?
I also prepaid, but I had no idea that there was interest accrued when I was prepaying. I know it's, not a lot. My concern is more about the people that have been doing it for years that know this, like the seniors and that are doing it, so. But, I would have no problem with rescinding that. If that
Thank you
comes
for
to it.
that. And just for clarification, there's no conflict of interest for either anybody around the room who has prepaid their taxes. Councilor Mann, you had your hand up?
I'm also one of the people that prepay because it seems I like it better than getting a big bill at one time. And I'll go along with this too if it's necessary. Maybe not appreciate it, but anyway.
Thank you. So the intent I got was that extend the bylaw till June of 2026 with, as of July 1st, the bylaw would be rescinded and there will be no interest paid on prepaid taxes for 2027. Is that a clear understanding?
Yes, I believe that we would leave it in place and request that the Finance Services Department review the rescinding of the bylaw as of July. And so as of July 1st, 2026, no more interest payments would be made. That timeline to be determined once Financial Services comes back with a rescinding date.
Okay, do you need that in the form of a motion? Or is direction adequate? There happens to be a motion. It's amazing how this works. Anybody have the desire to move that motion? Councilor Guil moving it, Councilor Manuel seconding it. Any further discussion? I thank staff for bringing this to our attention. It's an interesting situation. And it speaks to the need to watch every penny. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Now I'd like to come back to the tax to fund the proposed police reserve 1%. Like to open that up and what I'm really looking for at this point in time is some sense of information. I've heard two different scenarios where Golden's going to reach the 5,000 mark in 2028, which I have trouble believing, but I believe it's Stats Canada says it's 2041. So prior to setting a direction like this, I much more prefer some information come back to council to be able to understand when this would be happening, what the full accounting would look like. Because $81,000, does that represent 1% taxes, Ms. Brown?
Thank you for the question. It does represent 1% of the prior year taxes. And then moving forward, it would simply be increased based on the percentage increased established annually by council.
3%.
Part of the reasoning behind the 1% is actually establishing the reserve well in advance of it being required. And so there are many communities, especially our neighbor to the south in Vermeer has recently adopted a new policing reserve. And I believe they're starting at approximately like a cap of $200,000. And so it's really difficult to say when a community may or may not go over that limit. but it is relatively certain that it will happen in our future, perhaps not in the next 5, but likely in the next 10 to 20 years. With a minimal contribution, starting at that 1% of taxes, at the end of the 5-year period, we would have only have set aside $500,000. And all of those funds could go towards offsetting operating costs over the course of, I believe some communities have done it in such that when the change does come into place, they use 50% of the funds in the first year, and then perhaps 30% and 20% in years thereafter to reduce the large impact on the community. In addition to that, the establishing the police reserve doesn't necessarily have to come along with a required contribution. And so simply establishing and perhaps doing a minimal baseline enables the council to move quickly at such time as those estimates change, because you never can tell when they might go up or down. So until recently, I think it was fairly certain that within the next 5 to 10 years, we would be over that mark, and now it's been extended, but next year brings different information every time. So that's the initial reasoning behind establishing it.
Thank you. I've got a speakers list. Councilor Wheel, start off.
I know we have on our strat plan about trying to find other forms of revenue. We've talked about possibly parking that could, now I know Jasper has done really well with their parking to help fund certain things. Has there been any thought given to these other forms of revenue to be able to fund the police?
Other than direct taxation.
Other than direct taxation.
Ms. Brown?
I believe those other sources of revenue are currently on the CAO's work plan in the next couple of years. And so as we dig into those more and more, we could certainly look at those. It would be a requirement that it was a sustainable source of funding. And so I'm not too sure with parking and changes in tourism if that might be, but it could certainly contribute at a baseline. But I would defer to the CAO in terms of the timeline on that reporting, which I can't quite recall. And knowing that regardless of the source of funding, it will be a taxation impact on the general public once the timeline does come to bear.
Anything to follow up, Mr. Deniger?
Yeah, the initial report to council, as per the strat plan, if I can remember it correctly, is actually by the end of second quarter this year. So we'll outlay some options of alternate revenue sources we can pursue. The eliminating interest paid on taxes is actually an example, sort of a reverse alternate revenue. It's like reducing expenses, which kind of become a revenue. There's going to be a number of options, but we're not sure yet what the magnitude of those would be. And any alternate revenue sources, is very likely to include an upfront cost to get it going, just like any business endeavor, right? You need to put funds in to start earning profit. So there would be a lag in anything the council decides to do to actually start earning profit. Even if it were, say, parking, there's going to be the setup of the system, cost of software, the cut that the vendor's probably going to take, and so forth. And as much as it's nice to look at other tourism communities, I don't know if there's the pressure on Golden that there are in some other examples that have been mentioned around the table as to really how much revenue we could get from them. And I'm going to pose a rhetorical question actually back to our CFO regarding this, just to keep the conversation live here. If council were to establish a police reserve, is there anything binding council to not reallocating those funds to something else in the future, in the interim? Or is it once it's done, you can't touch the money?
Ms. Brown?
That is an excellent question. Usually the parameters of the bylaw would require a specific use of the funds. And so once council does designate it into that reserve fund, it would be used for that purpose only.
Thank you. We got Councilor Cooper.
I think I'm fine with the establishment of the reserve fund. I'm not okay right now with putting money into it, just on the purposes when I looked at what Census Canada, I'd like more information to find out where the 5,000 mark is coming from, because Census Canada and the province both were up to about 100, yeah, like 2041, I think it was, according to that, and it is a census year. So I would prefer if we have this conversation after the census numbers kind of came up again. I'd like the idea of the reserve. There's also been, according to, we've had 0% growth in the Golden has had 0% growth in the last 2 years, and only 1% and 2% the previous years before that. There was a growth spike of 4% 5 years ago, but within only 3% over the last 4 years and zero the last 2 years, according to the population growth. It's estimated, yeah, we won't reach 5,000 till 2043. So I like the idea of the reserve. I like the idea of the conversations, but I'm just not ready to put taxation into it yet until we have knowing exactly who is determining the number, because we all know what census determines and really what we feel the population is. There's two different numbers, but what is the determinant of that 5,000? I think that's the main question I have. And if it is, we're putting money into it now and we can only use it for policing, then yeah, what's the caveat in we don't reach it for 15 years and the money's sitting there and sitting there and sitting there? That's a bit where we've collected the tax and it's not equating to the service that we need.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Manuel next, myself, and Councillor Rowley.
I'm not excited about this, putting the money aside for the first when we get hit with the police cost. It will make it easier for the people who are paying taxes there, maybe the first year or so, but it's going to come on them one way or another. And I think we can best serve our community. We have on other ways. We have roads that go back for 60, 70 years or more, underground pipes, which Mr. Cochran does a lot to keep going as well as he can. We have older buildings. We need to keep our place up and running as well as we can. And I think that should always be a priority.
Thank you. I got myself next on the list. I would speak in favor of establishing a reserve, the concept of reserve. And I struggle with this. I go back and forth. I understand the value of putting a bunch of money in up front and leaving it there for a lot of years. The power of compound interest. Wonderful. After 5 years, we'll have $500,000 of a budget that at this point in time, when I look to communities around the province that have just tripped over that 5,000 mark in the last 5 years, I mean, it's a $1.5 million budget item for these folks. This is a big hit. It's the cost of doing business. I struggle with the concept of temporal fiscal equivalence in that you're taxing people now and they're not getting that service. They may not live here when that service comes into place 5, 10, maybe even 20 years down the road. So I struggle with that. I understand the value of creating a line item on the books so that it's there should a council, this council or a council of the future decide to go down that path. I appreciate the opportunity to look at other sources of revenues that could go into this, in that we have, well, I guess it would be non-property tax revenues that to offset some of these policing costs. This isn't, sorry about that, my throat's dry here. This is an item that has kept me awake at night for a number of years, especially when we have conversations as a community about other amenities that are important to the community. But again, when you start weighing those other amenities against policing, fire and road or protective services, water and sewer, I struggle with the weighing of them. So again, I'm not in favor of putting any dollars into this account, but I'm in favor of creating a line item so that it's there, so that each council has to look at that on an annual basis and have this discussion or more in-depth discussions. It also would open the door for, as Councillor Cooper said, thank you, the gathering of more information for this council and councils of the future to be able to digest and make a determination with that supplemental information. So that's where I'm at, and then I'll go to Councillor Routley.
Thank you, Mayor. That's it. I appreciate the opinions expressed thus far. And I guess, yeah, to echo the concerns around, supposedly a bunch of money, and in actuality, it works out to being a small drop each year in the actual costs of policing that have been experienced in other communities that have breached that 5,000 mark. But I suppose keeping it at the policy level, council currently is being presented with the privilege and opportunity of knowing that there exists a trolley problem in the future. We know that there will come a point where there will be an $1.5 million, at least in 2025 dollars. We'll see what that looks like in 15, 15, or some later year in those dollars. And there exists this opportunity then to rather than tax people now for a service that they may not necessarily immediately benefit from, I would reframe that as being invest in the betterment of the future generations so that they are not harmed by the immediate ramp up of taxation that will be necessary to address those police costs. We can have our cake and eat it too when it comes to making these policy decisions and addressing core infrastructure, linear infrastructure, whether it's roads, water, sewer, and all of that. We can address the very real, very present concern that Councillor Manuel raises while also ensuring that at the equivalent of 1% previous year's taxation, we're investing $500,000 over the next 5 years, and council may always elect to defer a year if need be, and collect greater information. We'll know more in the census, but we can immediately shift the ethos with which local government here in Golden addresses future trolley problems, whether it's the hard infrastructure that we see on the ground or the very amorphous operating costs of a police detachment that it's on the horizon. We're not entirely sure when. However, we can at least set aside a bit to make sure that when that does arise, we're not going to be putting it directly on the feet of that generation.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, some comments? And we had Councillor Hamburg and Councillor Guo after that.
So I just wanted to speak to the temporal fiscal equivalence as per the mayor's comment, as it is not necessarily a service change that occurs when the population exceeds the 5,000 mark. It is the same service for an increased cost of probably 1.5 to 2 million at that point. And therefore, I might propose that currently we are paying less than the population will have to pay as a whole in the future. And by putting aside the funds now, we are actually being more equivalent in terms of those costs, the true costs, because the limit of 5,000 is an arbitrary limit that was set by the province, and that is when those costs do increase for us. And should they change that in the future or decide it sooner or later, at least with some funds set aside, we can begin to prepare for costs that we know are sure to come. I suppose I should not say sure to come because they do change very often, but there is a high likelihood of that increase in costs. We could certainly minimize the contributions and start at $80,000 and do the same amount per year. If I extrapolate that out over the course of 20 years, we would probably have a little over 1.6 million at the 20-year mark in 2046, plus interest that is earned. And as the mayor has stated, that interest amount, the sooner you put the money in, the more interest you have the opportunity to earn as well. So I would just put that into the conversation as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments with regards to temper fiscal equivalents. Counselor Hambrick?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Ms. Brown mentioned a figure of $200,000 when she was talking about Invermere. Can you clarify what that $200,000 was?
Ms. Brown?
I believe the $200,000, I would have to look up their report once again. But that was a maximum contribution under their current policing reserve.
Any?
Okay, So would that be the total amount of the reserve or just an annual contribution maximum?
An annual contribution maximum, I believe. I would have
Okay.
to look that up for certainty.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So as follow-up on that, we don't know what they actually are putting into the, Invermere is putting into the reserve for 2026. Have they identified an amount, or is it the 200,000? This up to language is always interesting. I've got Councilor Wheel, and then I'll go to Councilor Cooper.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've been thinking about this a lot because of the correspondence we've received, as well as the fact that we have been trying to advocate for them to kind of lengthen the, that mark of 5,000 to maybe like stagger it or to 10,000. I think the advocacy part is really important. I'm not too fond of a tax increase if we can generate revenue from areas that are actually demanding this service outside of not just the local population. So I would like to see that, but I do believe that we have to prepare, because I don't know how far our advocacy is going to go, but we have to keep. I just want to state that we are doing that as well. So I do agree we do need some sort of reserve for this to plan. But I do think after the census, we'd have a clearer picture. So I don't know if we have to go all in this year.
So for clarification, you're supportive of the concept of creating a reserve account, a line item?
A reserve account, but I'm not supportive of contributions as
1%
this year until we actually know the census.
Okay, thank you. And I had Ms. Brown?
I have just looked it up, and the actual limit per year for contributions is 500,000, and
Great.
Invermere is starting with $200,000 in the current year.
Thank you for that clarification. I've got Councilor Cooper.
So when I'm here, like what I've been listening to, take one line from the mayor, what I've been hearing is we're interested in this. However, until I feel that this really is a need for a staff report and for some more information to come back, because we're talking about it, but we're all making our assumptions and we're guessing, but I'd like to see something first before we actually commit funds. I hear that a number of us have the desire, and we do want to be in front of it, but at the same time, citizens are already being taxed for policing. Although it be the provincial government, it would be good to know what the funds, how much that is that come out of our community with the taxation that is also currently happening, which I understand would stop. So that would decrease someone's tax bill, that amount. I'd like to know some of those numbers as well. How much are we currently paying for the province? And that would give us a time to also understand, because maybe we're paying 1.5 million as a collective to the province each year. Maybe we would be collecting the same amount as they're collecting, and there would be no change to taxation. Like, there's too many questions right now that I support the idea of the line item. I just don't support the taxing right now without a staff report, without more information gathered for us.
Thank you for that, Ms. Brown. Some comments?
Just as a direct answer, we collected on behalf of the Minister of Finance for police taxes, 414,000 in the prior year, in 2025 as a whole. So that would be on all of the municipal tax notices that went out to residents of the town of Golden. There was $414,000.
So therefore, we would, so everyone's in line of paying that. So the increase would be 1 million per se, or 800,000. If we were going up to 1,200,000, would be the difference that we would be needing to collect. So not per se the whole 100, the whole million, because we're already getting 400,000. People are used to paying the 400,000 part.
Follow up, Ms. Brown?
So including the establishment of the reserve, should contributions go forward as designed, in the first year, the residents of Golden would pay 504,000 for police services. In 2027, it would be 521,000 and then 538. So slowly increasing year over year, depending on the provincial breakdown, but nowhere near the 1.5 million jump. You could double what they currently pay and still not be close to what will be paid in the future year when we tip over that 5,000 point.
Which I guess I appreciate. I just would like to have a staff report with more things to digest all at once, to view it back and forth.
Thank you, Council Manuel and Council Rutley.
I agree with that we could use more information that makes sense. I'm just concerned that because we talk about the new hit that's going to come down sometime in terms of policing costs, but I mean, in the time I've been here, I've seen things like I learned things like the roads we have north of west of the hospital. They were built years ago, and they were never built properly, and they're just those. And even one we had to fix a while ago, and it had some underground piping. We ended up doing it at the same time. It cost a lot of money. Fire halls cost of money. Oh my God, and fire trucks. We're dealing with a town that much of its infrastructure is quite old, and it's still very expensive to fix. So that remains to me the priority. Because if we manage to shave some of the pain off when we get pay additional cost for police, we still need this town running as well as we can make it. And I think that is the best legacy we can leave.
Thank you. I got Council Rutley next.
Thank you, Worship. I don't think that it's necessarily a fair portrayal to say that the establishment and dedication to the principles of a police reserve is at the cost of hard linear infrastructure like roads, sewers, and sewer and water lines. We've been told or we're aware of what the actual costs in communities that have recently breached the 5,000 level and what those costs they're facing. I particularly appreciate the reframing within the lens of temporal fiscal equivalence and around the fact that currently the ratepayers in Golden are having their police costs subsidized by, assuming a 1-to-1 cost attribution over $1 million. And so I struggle with the notion of saying we really appreciate the reserve, but then not putting action behind those words. In 1 year's time, we could be nearly $82,000 ahead of where otherwise we would be if we did nothing. We would have greater information as far as the population growth once the census numbers come out, and we can continue to pursue alternate revenue streams and the very critical advocacy with the province to try to alleviate some of those cost pressures, and we can make real progress on, again, what I had referred to in the past as a sort of trolley problem, or a trolley the trolley experiment on the horizon. It is a real possibility. We are seeing the interest in development. Those units aren't going to sit empty. We're going to see people move to a community that we love and call home, and that's great. And so to know that we're seeing interest of folks to come to town, for folks to build and then fill units, and then not doing anything, feels problematic in my mind. And so certainly fully supportive of the notion of starting at 1% and committing ourselves to that continued advocacy and looking at alternate funding sources wherever possible. But this is the current tools that we have. And to say we support it and do nothing otherwise feels troubling in my mind.
Thank you. I got myself and then I'll go to Council Cooper. I like the conversation around the table. I mean, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. There's just tough decisions to be made. As we're sitting here, I'm thinking, part of me wants to lobby the province to take that present invoicing of 33% approximately, if it's 500,000 now of a what should be a $1.5 million bill. To lobby the province to actually increase those gradually as communities come into higher numbers closer to that 5,000. That's another way of doing it. There's multiple ways of doing it, to the point where you get to that 70%, which is the trigger at the 5,000. So just a thought comment there. I'll go to Councilor Cooper.
I would just comment that establishing a reserve and asking for more information is not per se doing nothing. I feel that those are two very good steps. So when we're saying we're not doing anything, I feel that we are starting to establish a reserve, although not putting money into it until we have more information. I don't think that that is us doing nothing. I would contest that we're doing two big steps to get to the point where we are able to have the decision. I'm not comfortable with putting any money in now because I would be voting against it because I don't have the information I require, such as who determines the 5,000, such as its census year, such as a number of the arguments that came up tonight. So my counterpoint would just be like, it's not doing anything. We're doing multiple steps to get to the point, whereas then we're all comfortable with putting the money in.
Thank you. I'm gonna be so bold as to speak one more time. The 82,000 that's proposed for 2026. My assumption is that's within the existing budget increase that council has set. And that was at 5%? Or was it 6%? I see thumbs up for 6%. So just for clarity, so that contained within that proposed budget increase, this would be another 1% increase to the budget. So based on that, I'm going to speak opposed to the concept of putting money in at this point in time, because if we put this money in here, in theory, something else is coming off the table. So I don't know what that something else should be if staff are going to be able to keep things to the 6% as directed by council. Ms. Brown?
So this is a great time to introduce another concept and discuss the municipal property tax increase and the impact on the general ratepayer. So I might ask that we open both the reserve contributions and I can't find it here. There's another one in there.
So is there a lull here where we could take a few minutes, go grab some sustenance and some bio breaks, and then come back and continue this conversation?
I support that.
As quick as he's.
With that, a motion to, no, we'll just take a short break here for the public that's there. Mr. Taylor, we will be coming back in probably at 20 minutes. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. So at 18:30. And for the clarification, that is Mountain Standard Time. Okay. We will continue this conversation. Ms. Brown, prior to the break, you had drawn our attention to some other documents.
Yeah, so we were talking about the contribution to the policing reserve. And then conversation is venturing towards the approved council directed increase to the budget. And so every year, council sets a baseline increase, and for 2026 through 2030, it was 6% per year. And it does impact a little bit of the way that we talk about those increases. And so in looking at the budget and with some of the information provided by the initial graphs for the long-term financial plan for long-term financial plan for asset management, and council is probably already aware that we have some significant expenditures coming down the line in terms of our major infrastructure and a definite need for contributions to the reserve. So if you look at,
So a question of clarification, is that document that you just had on the board, is that part of our package?
it's not, it is a living, breathing document that council can adjust as we go. And so it's going to play into how we set the maximum tax increase for the current year. So in the current budget, it has been set at 10% per year in order to increase the funding to the municipal reserves, as well as to fund the proposed municipal police reserve. So that 10% increase translates directly into a 4.25% overall increase in the taxation. And so for clarity from council, understanding whether it is a 6% baseline revenue tax increase or 6% being the maximum overall tax rate increase to the general public, is the direction that I would like to make sure we're on the same page about. And how that impacts residential as well as other properties is certainly important as well. So at the 6% minimum, we would have had to, if I had done a 6% revenue increase to our budget, we would have been in a deficit and required additional cuts or changes to service levels or otherwise in order to meet the budget. However, with a 10% revenue increase that results in the 4.25% overall tax rate increase, we are able to significantly begin eating into the reserve requirements that we would have. So this is the overall impact of that 10% increase. And I can show you based on scenarios, as council has done before, which scenario impacts which residential group the most or the least. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation as we start to look at the reserve balances and the requirements over the course of the next few years. So I'm showing this document as we are going to be going down and taking a look at this, but first I'm going to show you the 10% along with the reserve transfers and the balances at the end of it, considering the increasing costs coming down the line.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got to take one step back and just truly understand the direction that was given by council was a 6% budget increase.
Okay.
And so you're defining that as on the revenue side.
Correct.
What I'm hearing is that to this point in time, that our budget does not reflect a 6% budget increase. It's actually reflecting the 10% budget increase.
So we began with a 6% budget increase.
As directed by council.
Correct. And as presented now with the addition of reserve transfers, it has gone to 10%. I can take those out immediately, the additional reserve transfers, and show you the 6% budget. However, it may require discussions regarding service levels and decreases in expenditures as the expenses coming in were not able to meet the 6%. So realistically, with a 6% budget increase, we would have had to reduce contributions to reserves, reduce service levels, or change operational programs.
Thank you for that. I'm, I'll go to Mr. Jennigar.
Just want to step even further back a little bit and just let you know that this isn't the CFO
No,
herself bringing this forward. This is actually a direction from myself after much conversation. I believe you and I briefly spoke about it. The concept here, and what I want to make sure that council and the public understand, is that historically here for a number of years, it's been looked at with the internal perspective, going, what's the budget increase? What's our revenue increase? Without thinking, what's the perspective that's talked about in the general public? And when you go onto any news site, you hear the news on TV or on the radio, what people are talking about in the typical number, 99% of the time, they're talking about the tax revenue increase that the public see, that the ratepayer sees. So when they say they're talking about, oh, we're getting a 4% increase this year in our taxes, they're talking about from the outsider's perspective, outside this organization perspective. The actual budget increase internal to each of these municipalities could be much, much higher due to growth or other factors. So the direction that's existed in the past about this, target a 6% increase, that's an internal number. So a 6% increase, if you have enough growth, that's a 0% tax increase from the public perspective, which historically, if Golden's been doing that, which it has been, it's way off the mark with what other municipalities are doing and why we find ourselves in a situation where our capital deficit keeps getting worse and worse, and we're feeling more and more squeezed trying to provide basic services. Because we're aiming for this internal view of things without comparing apples to oranges. We've been comparing our apples to everybody else's oranges, right? So what I've asked the CFO to do, and she's done here in this presentation here, and I was happy to play with these living documents with you, is let's look about what is the public impact. What's the bill the taxpayers are going to have to pay percentage-wise? Compare it to other municipalities out there to make sure that we're being within reason, and not worry quite so much about that internal percentage that has been a historical target. It's still good to have it, and we can look at what we've been doing in the past. But when we're talking to the public, when you're talking to the public, let's think about what are they seeing on their bill, and is that enough overall to actually keep things moving forward for our town?
thank you for that. Councilor Cooper.
The only thing I would like clarity, because we never came to an answer, because the 81,000 is in the budget for 2025 for policing. And I don't know if we came to a consensus if we wanted to remove that, because I feel there was a few councils that did want to remove it and a couple maybe that didn't. So I think that that also plays a role that we should take the step back and see what the appetite is for that 81,000, because I'm still at the point where I would like to not have that in this year's budget until we have the more information.
Any response from staff? No. Okay, Councilor Manuel.
And with regard to that 81,000, I have another question. Would this money be locked in a specific thing only for the use of the fire offsetting police things or police costs, or would it be something available if we had an issue that we had to deal with in terms of infrastructure?
Ms. Brown?
So a reserve established specifically for the police would be used only specifically for the police. However, there is the opportunity to borrow funds amongst the reserves. So should there be a requirement for those funds, it could be shared from one reserve to the next with a repayment plan. So it wouldn't simply be sitting idle should an urgent need arise, but hopefully with the increasing contributions to the reserve as planned, there would be less of an opportunity or less of a chance of that occurring.
Thank you.
I have a question. I guess the first statement, I'm supportive of the reserve transfers that we've allocated. I don't know that it would be defined as an aggressive approach, but it's maybe the word is it's a realistic approach, given financial constraints, blah, 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 blah. Um, but we're doing something, we're trying the best we can type of thing. The 81,000 that you've identified for the police reserve, is that within that 4.25% tax increase?
It is.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I guess I gotta say, I'm still shifting gears, and I appreciate the comments from Mr. Denigar. For myself personally, I'm gonna actually find I need to take a little bit more time to be able to digest this, to be able to put it into a context, because I'm not adverse to service level cuts, if that's in fact what's needed. That is a reality coming down the pipe, whether it's this year, next year, or 2 years after that. Those are the realities that people need to be aware of. And I'd like to have an understanding where there might be opportunities for those service level cuts. From a personal level, I don't know if that's would be the desire of all council or not. With that, any other comments, Councilor Guido?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, on all points. If that's, 4.5% or 4.25% increase, including it in there. I still struggle with putting it in a police reserve when we're trying to lobby to the government to say that they should be increasing the number of people for the population before they start charging what they are. And it kind of shows them that we're actually seriously planning for this when we could be using that money elsewhere in the organization. The idea is to put it in there and earn compounded interest, but it would be nice to almost like put it in a different reserve and then pull it out later for a police reserve. I just don't want them to think that we have, we can have all this money that
We've given in.
yeah, and especially when we're advocating for them to change what they're doing. That's the only problem I have. I don't have a problem with putting money for a rainy day type of thing, but putting it out there saying, yeah, we know it's coming, it's like we've given in. That's my problem with it.
Mr. Denigar?
Feel like this poor horse has been beaten to death. So I may suggest that someone move to establish a proposed police reserve at 1% and then see how the vote turns out. I suspect it will die, and then we can move on to the next subject.
Mover, Councilor Outley, seconder, Councilor Manuel.
Sorry, can you repeat? To put the 1%
Yeah.
in, that's what you're asking for?
Yeah, I would resolve to put the 1% in with this to establish a police reserve and to put 1% into it and see how the vote goes.
Thank you for that. I had a speakers list. I've got myself on there, and I've got Councilor Routley, I believe, after. Councilor Cooper, did you have your hand up? My apologies. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, Ms. Brown, you had a couple documents up on the screen. One of them, I believe, was the impacts on the different classes. I mean, that's information that's not in the package that we received, is it? So that's kind of information I'd like to have before we actually move forward with this. On the basis of that, and on the basis of the fact that at this point in time, staff have brought forward, using the old language, and my apologies for that, a 10% budget increase when the direction was a 6% budget increase. I will speak against the motion at this point in time. That's not to say that I'm not open to those conversations down the road, because I'd like to understand this more, understand the impacts. This is going beyond basically the direction that council had previously given. I appreciate the rationale and the translation back into common language, when people compare their tax increases, they're talking about the same language.
That's right. Just to clarity, I was proposing a resolution just regarding the police reserve, just so
Okay,
that we can get that settled before we get into the more everything.
broader one. Okay, speaking to the motion, and my apologies. Anybody speaking to the motion? I've got, Councilor Rowley.
I am, no, I'm good. Thank you. I think I've made my points, clear enough. I think that, you know, the notion of, you know, the establishment of the reserve, you know, it is an action. It is the beginning of a process, but I think in my perspective, to really, give that process the care and attention that I think we all recognize it's due. I think that an allocation of 1% seems fair. We're hearing, you know, within the lens of temporal fiscal equivalence that in essence, current taxpayers aren't paying, within the municipality aren't necessarily paying the full cost. And so this is a way to ensure that future generations can ease into it when those costs are fully realized. And that, you know, $80,000 in the pot, $82,000 in the pot, is it's a good start, and we can still maintain the advocacy piece, and we can put it, we can be very clear and proud that we're taking it seriously and putting a bit of cash aside each year, but we can make it clear to the province that ultimately at the end of 15 years, if you know the horizon of 2042 is correct, really will only have enough for 1 year of operating costs for such a facility if they remain at the current level in other communities now. So, you know, it's this process doesn't preclude us from looking at alternate revenue sourcing to fund the same service or to fund a reserve for the same service, nor does it preclude council from continued advocacy to stretch out the horizon a bit. But certainly it shifts the ethos with which this local government approaches real costs coming on the horizon, much the same way that we were doing it with linear infrastructure.
Thank you. Councilor Cooper?
I was just gonna say, I am for the establishment. I'm not for the 1% at this time, just from what I said earlier.
Thank you, Councilor Manuel.
I could be consistent, be against it at this point. I know people in the future, maybe 2015 will appreciate what we do. We do need to think of the future, but I mean, we're getting our pool at the best is probably going to cost 3 or 4 million to just to keep up. And I think most people in town would say, I want a pool. I don't care about those people 15 years from now. So to keep their costs down, we want a pool and et cetera, et cetera. And I think we need to address our current needs because they're significant.
Okay, Councilor Amberg?
Yeah, thanks, your worship. I'm going to speak in favor of the reserve and leaving it in place at the level that it is presented. I think it's looking forward to the future, knowing there's a freight train coming at us, and the more we can do to prepare this for the future of that freight train's arrival, I think it's irresponsible to not do something about it now. So I will vote in favor of the motion to establish the reserve at the current level that's in the budget.
Thank you. Councilor Will?
I'm in favor of the amount. I'm not in favor of putting it in a police reserve. I would rather see it put into a different reserve that is still gonna get the compound interest. I think it speaks against our advocacy.
Thank you for that. And I'll go, at this point in time, in principle, I'll be voting against this on the basis not of money going into a policing reserve, but on the basis that we're being presented with a 10% increased budget. And that was not the direction of council historically. personally, I feel I need some time to digest what all this is gonna impact, and if I've heard that this $82,000 is part of that 10%, 4.25, so we've gone from approximately a 2.8% tax increase to a 4.25% tax increase, something in that ballpark, maybe let's call it 3 to 4.25, whatever the case may be. Maybe even 3.25 to 4.25. It's probably more accurate. So yeah, I'll be voting against it based on that principle at this point in time. Any other speakers to the motion? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Counselor Hamburg and Counselor Routley in favor, opposed? Counselor Guile, Counselor Manuel, Counselor Cooper, thank you, and myself opposed. The motion is defeated. And thank you for bringing that forward and bringing it to a head. With that, I had said that we would adjourn this meeting at 10 minutes to 7 to allow council a bio break and a chance to get ready for the regular open council meeting that's gonna happen in a few minutes. And for me to find my voice. Could be a long night for all of you. My apologies. So with that, do we need to set a date for the next SCOF meeting? Maybe we'll allow staff to follow up
I
on
guess,
that.
do you want to attempt to continue tonight after the regular meeting? Or do you, I mean, it could be a split. We could do some tonight and some another day.
I heard Councilor Cooper, are you able to make that work?
I have to right now, like, I don't know how long.
So we could reconvene after the regular open council meeting and have a hard cutoff time at 2100. Gives you a little bit of time.
That works.
So then I would entertain a motion to recess the SCOF meeting until after the regular open council meeting. Councilor Manuel, Councilor Routley, all those in favor? Opposed? We are recessed. Okay, Councilor Dean, we're on a tight leash here. Reconvene this meeting. Standing Committee on Finance. We'll cut right to, actually, I need a motion. Councilor Ellie, sent by Councilor Cooper. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And we'll go to Miss Brown. So which document should we be bringing up first off?
Just reminding myself of where we left off the conversation, I think it might be wise to look at the contributions to the reserves and expenditures from them. So that would be from the draft reserve balance forecast.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm assuming you've got the document up there. Yes, okay.
Giving everybody a second to get in. All good. So in looking at the amount of money required in order to carry out both capital and operating projects over the course of the next 5 years, the forecast takes into account the current balance, all of the planned contributions, as well as the planned expenditures. And so of interest here, I think, is the amount, despite the total that we are planning to put in, which with the 10% tax increase would be 24 million. I believe with a 6% increase, it would be 19 million. We are still spending approximately 79% of all of the contributions that we're putting into the reserve.
For clarification, you said the 10% tax increase?
The 10% tax budget increase.
Budget increase, the 4.25% tax increase.
Correct.
Thank you.
And so if you look at the building and facilities capital reserve, which is in the second section under capital reserves, we're
You
putting in,
highlighted?
we're planning to put in 3.8 million, but spending 2.997. And so your ending balance is going to be below 2 million. So that's a 78% expenditure of that reserve with the increases as planned for in the 10% budget. I believe in a 6% budget, we would spend even more.
Please explain that statement.
So with the reserves, with the change from the 6% budget to the 10% budget, the
Actually-
increase was mainly in reserve contributions. And so right now we're spending 78% of what we put into the reserve based on the 10% budget. If we go to the 6% budget, then we're going to have to reduce the contributions to the reserve or reduce service levels alternately. And in that case, we'll be spending closer to 80%, 90% of the contributions that we put in over the course of the next 5 years.
So it's not that the amount being spent would be reduced, it's that the percentage of contribution being spent would be reduced. And I'm all for switching the language over right here, and we're going from the two scenarios you're giving are 4.25 and 3.25% tax increases.
4.25 would have been the increase for 10%. I've calculated with 6% and it would only be 2.33% increase. And so that's how over the course of the last many years, if we're doing a 5% increase to the budget, we're only doing an average 2% overall increase. And so there's a lot of numbers interplaying.
Again, just so I can put my mind around this, I recall that the 4.25% tax increase included the $82,000 to policing.
Correct.
That did not go forward. So then there would be an adjustment from 4.25 to 3.25. So we're comparing 2.33 and
That would be apples and oranges. The 1% revenue increase does not equate to a 1% rate increase.
Well, the $87,000, I thought that represented 1% tax.
Revenue. So the 81 is a 1% revenue increase. So if you think about the 10%, there is 6% that's covering general operations, 3% covering increases to the reserves, and the 1% is what would be going to a policing reserve. But that as a whole, all of those increases result in a 4.25 tax rate increase. And so it's apples and oranges.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilor Cooper,
So if we go down to the 6% as opposed to the 10%, could you tell us what the difference of the contributions to the reserves would be? Because I assume that's what the differences we're talking about. So those numbers are numbers that I think my brain needs.
So I calculated during the break that if I bring us back to a 6% revenue increase, we will have a $1.55 million shortfall for 3 years before considering any additional contributions to the reserves. And so for the reserves, with the 10%, we were able to contribute 24 million over 5 years. And now we would be at approximately 20 million. So we would lose 4.5 million to reserves, and we would also have a budget shortfall of 1.55 million, which would require going back to the table, either reducing our current reserve contributions, reducing current budgets, or reducing service levels. There is a happy medium between those two alternatives, the 6% and the 10%, that would see our existing levels as per last year's budget. And I think that is a balance of at about 8.1% revenue increase.
and again, these shortfalls are based on what premise? I'm still trying to put my head around this. I apologize to council.
The shortfalls would be based on pre-existing contributions to the reserves from the prior adopted 5-year financial plan, increased asks from operational departments in terms of expenditures, changes in levels of service, a multitude of factors based on the budgets that council has seen to date, and all of those increases or decreases, as well as the level of capital expenditures required, and so those expenses of the capital projects. So,
Okay, thank you. Follow up, Councilor
Still
Cooper?
boggles my mind a bit too, like, because I feel when we're looking at this, we're talking about decreasing the level of contributions, not necessarily like just decreasing the amount of contributions to the reserves. Like that's what I kind of was understanding by the take of this. At 10%, this is what we contribute to the reserves. If we do 6%, I don't understand why it would affect other things. I thought we were just reducing basically the excess or the contribution to the reserves.
it is certainly an option, but council can make those decisions. I would just caution that further reducing contributions to the reserves when we already know that there are major projects outstanding.
I guess I understand. I just wanted to know what the factual numbers were, the differences that we could see. So like,
At the bottom of this sheet, there was a number of columns. Not all of the amounts were filled in. What was missing was the contribution and then the expenses in the financial plan for 2026, as well as the financial plan 27 to 30. Those 4 blanks at the bottom.
The total contributions for the 5-year would be the total in and the total contributions out. So total contributions in 5 years would be almost 25 million on the far right-hand side. There, yeah. And then total payments out, so for capital or operating projects would be 19 million. So we're spending 78% of the contributions that we're currently making in this plan with a 10%, not a 6% budget increase.
So we're saying that only 21% of our reserve contributions are going long-term beyond the financial plan.
Correct.
Okay, I would still have liked to have seen the breakdown for 2026 separate, just see the ins and outs in 2026 and then for the other 4 remaining years, but we've got the big numbers at the end, which is kind of the end of the financial plan. That's stated again with financial plans. Projections beyond year 1 are best information projections. And so that's why the in and outs, the contributions and the expenses for 2026 was a number that I was personally looking forward to be able to put it into a context. Okay, thank you, Councilor Manuel.
I get a bit confused on this, I'll confess that, but we want to keep the taxes reasonable, whatever that means. We do need to put money away in reserves because we have aging infrastructure, and that's also taken for granted. But you said there's a compromise. Where does that go? Where does that leave us?
I see. The compromise would be that rather than a 6% or a 10% increase, we find a happy medium in the middle to like an 8% increase or 9% increase to the budget, which would result in somewhere between a 2.3 to a 4.25 overall increase in the taxation rates.
Councilor Rutley, actually, we'll go to Ms. Danagard first, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I just want to be conscious of our time, that I know some of us have to run, and I think this is a heavy, serious conversation, so I think maybe having to leave earlier is a good thing. We can send out more information in preparation for the next meeting so that you can see this more visually and understand the differences between revenue taxation and average home. Just to throw out some numbers, which I'm sure we'll send you as well. So using the standard form of looking at tax rates, not our revenue, tax rates. I'm just going to list a few here. These are actually listed on Cranbrook's website. So they just authorized, their council just authorized a 5% tax rate increase, not revenue increase, 5% tax rate increase. So they quote some other ones: Kimberly 2.21%, Nelson 7.75%, Nanaimo 6.3%, Penticton 5.93%, Kamloops 7.2%, Prince George 5.98%, Revelstoke 4.75%, New West 4.7%, and Chilliwack 4.9%. So these are some that are currently known. So that's the tax rate that the public sees, right? So historically, with Golden aiming for 6% revenue, our tax rate to the public has been way under this, what's now a normal tax rate, which is why this shortfall is that we would be continuing what we've been doing here, which is underfunding capital projects. And that's why the approach to this budget this year, and that I directed staff to do, and that we talked about as council, with council, was that I want them to stop putting things below the line as unfunded projects with the hope that one day there will be money for it, because that's never going to happen. Hope isn't going to solve our problems. We need to actually start raising these revenues, and they will have an impact on the taxpayers. But even at what's proposed at 10%, if it were to be a, let's say 4.12% increase, because we're taking out the police one, that's still well within the norm of here, if low, if anything, but gets us on track right away to what the preliminary projections are for what we need to raise to take care of our infrastructure, just to take care of it, not expand it, not to make it better, just to take care of it and replace it at end of life. So just ask the council, wait for more information from staff on this, digest it, really have a think, talk to your neighbors and each other about it. No more than 2 people at a time. And think about, is council have the appetite right now? And do we think the community has the appetite right now to, as we presented in another document, it was the draft municipal property tax financial plan, where the finance officer's broken down municipal operations, which you'll actually see are negative numbers for a few years, and then a 0 and a 1. Like, our operations are not getting enhanced. This tax increase is purely for infrastructure. This looming deficit we know, and we're not even talking about the elephant in the room, which is the sewage treatment plant. That's a whole other thing. But the 10% would get us very close to what this preliminary report from our contractor is going to bring to you later this year, saying we need to raise these funds over this time span. This will get us going in that direction. So any delay just makes that a steeper curve of increases in the future. So, but I don't think you should have to feel under the gun to make a decision right now. Just let this absorb.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the comparables. That was gonna be one of my questions. Ms. Brown?
Just for context and follow-up, the sustainable annual funding, just based on a very preliminary draft for the town of Golden, would be annual funding of 7.1 million per year. And in year 5, we get to 7.05 with the current plan. And that's just sustainable annual funding.
And so what does that translate into a percentage of tax increase on an annual basis for that 7.1%? What, $7.1 million?
This plan right here proposes a 10% increase per year to the municipal tax budget.
Revenue. Yeah, I guess it would be hard to say in future years what the tax implication is, because it really depends on growth and value.
Absolutely. But ballparking. Okay. Thank you. Councilor Riley, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I was the CEO kind of beat me to the punch, but I was just going to raise the flag and encourage members of council to approach the conversation in the similar fashion as to the utility rates, where we committed to approaching in an aggressive, less aggressive than initially proposed, but an aggressive fashion to reach self-sustainability. And what we are seeing, and I greatly appreciate from staff, is a similar proposal as to how we will get to that point for the rest of the municipal services, as far as maintaining those reserves for the long-term financial sustainability of the municipality. So my thanks to staff thus far, and certainly keeping it at that like higher order kind of principle or policy level of like attaining long-term financial sustainability for the organization, from sidewalks to sewers. And what I'm seeing is a pathway to that. So
Recognize that we keep adding some more sidewalks.
I asked the question, it was answered, and I'm very happy. So thank you.
I would echo Councilor Rutland's comments, and I appreciate the challenge to staff in bringing this forward this time. I appreciate the shift in the language, because it's been an ongoing challenge to try and translate this for the general public. This way, we're now all speaking the same language. And I'm happy with a shift from this point forward to that new language as far as tax increase, as opposed to any other language. I'm not even going to repeat. So thank you very much. With that, and looking forward to the supplemental information, and staff, I apologize for the challenge of trying to coordinate another finance committee meeting. I think everybody around the council table will do what they can to be able to fit it into the times that work for staff. Looking forward to the supplemental information, and with that, I'm not sure what number it is. Motion for adjourn. Councilor Rowland, he beat you up. Councilman, you second. And that's adjourning the finance committee meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.